Hi everyone. Hopefully some of you have made it back to see this lovely playlist again. Following up from a last post, this is a lovely article from AI and Ethics in 2022, so I feel a little late to the party, but it was shared by Seams, I'm sure, and that's why I have it. Can AI systems meet the ethical requirements of professional decision making in healthcare by Ellen Gillies and Peter Smith? And because I've already done one take of this and followed it up, I'm going to skip the abstract. And I'm also going to try to remind myself that I have to scroll with the wheel, which I'm usually not good at doing. But if I click on the arrow in this one, it just bad things happen. The growth of AI in professional decision making. As the amount of data available to businesses and public organizations increases, the growing demand to derive value from big data increases in parallel. Very often, the sheer quantity of data renders it impossible to analyze by human means, and AI is used. Worldwide business spending on AI is expected to hit 50 billion this year and 110 billion annually by 2024. In healthcare, automated analysis of imaging and health screening offers potential benefits in terms of speed and analysis and accuracy. In April 2018, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration granted approval for IDXDR to be marketed as the first artificial intelligence AI-based diagnostic system that does not require clinician interpretation to detect a greater than a mild level of diabetic retinopathy in adults diagnosed with diabetes. In December 2018, researchers at Massachusetts General Hospital and Harvard Seas reported a system that was as accurate as trained radiologists at diagnosing intracranial hemorrhages which lead to strokes. In May 2019, researchers at Google and several academic medical centers reported an AI designed to detect lung cancer was 94% accurate, beating 6 radiologists and recording fewer false positives and false negatives. So, the ethical challenges of professional decision making. The nature of professionalism. Dreyfus and Dreyfus proposed a model of professional expertise that plots an individual's progression through a series of 5 levels: novice, advanced beginner, competent, proficient, and expert. In the novice stage, a person follows rules that are context free and feels no responsibility for anything other than following those rules. Competence develops after having considerable experience. Proficiency is shown in individuals who use intuition in decision making and develop their own rules to formulate plans. Expertise is characterized by fluid performance that happens unconsciously, automatically, and no longer depends on explicit knowledge. Thus, the progression is envisaged as a gradual transition from rigid adherence to taught rules and procedures through a largely intuitive mode of operation that relies heavily on deep implicit knowledge but accepts that sometimes an expert level analytical approaches are still likely to be used when intuitive approach fails initially. Knowledge may be divided into explicit and implicit knowledge. Explicit can be attained easily from any codified information. By contrast, implicit knowledge is not expressible in some languages. It is considered intuitive, acquired through practical experience, and as such is subjective and contextual, cannot be readily made explicit or formalized. This view of implicit knowledge suggests its supremacy over explicit knowledge. While tacit knowledge can be possessed by itself, explicit knowledge must rely on being tacitly understood and applied. Hence, all knowledge is either tacit or rooted in tacit knowledge. Although the Dreyfus brothers acknowledge this division of knowledge, they assert that skills are exclusive instances of know-how or implicit knowledge. You can ride a bicycle because you possess something called know-how, which are acquired from practice and sometimes painful experience. They assert that when we perform a skill, we basically execute implicit knowledge without a connection to explicit knowledge. They believe that skills are automatic dispositions that cannot be readily made explicit. They go further and propose the net effect of learning as intuition and define it in terms of implicit knowledge. When we speak of intuition or know-how, we are referring to the understanding that effortlessly occurs upon seeing similarities with previous experiences. They use intuition and know-how as synonyms. In practice, they define skills at expert level almost exclusively in terms of implicit knowledge. This approach has been developed within the healthcare context by Benner to model the development of nursing skills, and although highly influential, has not been without its critics. Some authors, such as Gobet and Chassis, claim that the model is too simplistic to be helpful and propose alternatives. Story et al. Refined the Banner approach to address some of its perceived limitations whilst retaining its essential characteristics. Penner contrasts this with the use of the Dreyfus model within physician education, where he argues that the model is still applied uncritically. Contrary to the debate raised in academic nursing fields, judging by medical publications and recommendations from academic organizations, the current form of Dreyfus's model is being accepted almost without explicit criticism from physicians. The progression of skills development has been linked to the degree of autonomy within which individuals may safely and ethically operate. Gillies and Howard argue that the level of proficiency determines the degree of autonomy that practitioners may safely be allowed, as shown in Table 1, which is this big thing down here that was confusing me earlier when I did the first take. Alright, so the 6 levels. Novice, unable to perform the skill. Oh, close instruction or guidance, able to perform minimal, still requires regular instruction. Regulate, work without supervision, may need occasional instruction. Skillful in this aspect, capable of demonstrating, highly skillful, intuitive grasp, all that good stuff. Alright. So, professional codes of conduct. Dawson argues that there are significant reasons for opting for a professional code of practice as a means of producing ethical conduct. The apparent clarity and simplicity of such a view, a fixed standard which allows the professional to know what he or she must provide for the client, and the client in turn knows what to expect from the professional. An independent, predetermined criterion which is written down and can be consulted so that ambiguity and misunderstandings can be minimized, leading to a reduced possibility of legal action and providing greater satisfaction for both parties. Sounds great. If I can just get this to align so we can read. Okay. Code of conduct are based around a set of rules, and as Dawson argues, there would seem to be no problem in a code's approach if we were able to identify in each situation what the appropriate rules are, but a code of practice can never be rich enough to provide guidance in all situations, perhaps because there are so many ethically relevant factors to take into account. In practice, almost all the rules found in professional codes of conduct require judgment on behalf of the professional practitioner. Paragraph 4, the General Medical Council of Ethical Guidance for Medical Doctors states, you must use your judgment applying the principles to the various situations you will face as a doctor, whether or not you hold a license to practice, whatever field of medicine you work in, and whether or not you routinely see patients. You must be prepared to explain and justify your decisions and actions. One of the key requirements is to only operate within the limits of the practitioner's competence. You must recognize and work within the limits of your competence. A key component of the Kennedy Report, arising from the Bristol Royal Infirmary Inquiry, deals with the need to assure that clinical professionals only operate within their area of competence. It highlights the need for effective continuing professional development to keep up with improvements in practice and the need for adequate supervision and management to ensure that this is taking place. This requirement is echoed in other healthcare professional codes of conduct. You must keep within your scope of practice, mainly practicing in the areas you have appropriate knowledge, skills, and experience for. And this is mirrored in other professional codes of conduct beyond the healthcare professionals. Engineering professionals have a duty to acquire and use wisely the understanding, knowledge, and skills needed to perform their role. They should always adequate care and perform services only in areas in which they are currently competent or under competent supervision. I think that's the bottom of that page. The limitations of AI technologies, a historical perspective. To consider whether AI systems meet the ethical requirements of professional decision-making, we shall consider the limitations of two AI archetypes. Heuristic-based systems. The earliest expert systems deployed in the 1980s, such as Mycin and XCOM, were the subject of fierce criticism by authors such as Dreyfus, who were able to point to many of the limitations of these systems. One of the key limitations was the characteristic described as brittleness, the inability to cope with a problem outside of their competence. Yes, AI has this a lot. Like, if I haven't seen it before, I can't deal with it, which is why I'm always like, please, let me just hire more humans. Humans are so much more flexible than replacing everyone with the tech. Anyway, side rant. As early as 1960, there had been dramatic examples of brittleness in heuristic-based systems. In 1960, there was an indication in the recently installed early warning system in Greenland of a massive impending Soviet missile attack. It was an error, of course, and turns out the system's radar signals had bounced back off the moon. How did this happen? It turned out the moonrises hadn't been thought of by the designers, so they weren't in the system model. Yes, this is the issues I have with climate change, too. We don't have that much, modeled, so how do we know what we're predicting? Disaster was averted when the humans in charge applied a degree of common sense. No. So I like editorials. Their first thought was to contact the U.S. government in Washington, but an iceberg had cut the telegraph cable and communication was impossible. Gosh, I hate it when that happens. When they considered the situation, various factors suggested this might be a false alarm, kind of like the thing in Hawaii years ago. Heads up if you remember that. For one thing, the whole system was new. In addition, they realized that Khrushchev happened to be in New York, and it seemed unlikely the Soviets would have chosen such a time for an all-out attack. Yeah, no, maybe they're sick of the guy. Turned out that the system had been confused by a rising moon, and moonrises had not been considered by the designers, because why would they? So they were not in the systems model. Yeah, this is the bias inherent in all AI systems, because, again, they're designed by mostly white engineers. Mostly male. Anyway, by 1975, an expert system known as Mycin surpassed a typical doctor's ability to diagnose meningitis in patients. I had that was fun, but could easily produce false results if asked to diagnose beyond its area of expertise. Again, narrow AI versus general AI. Narrow AI, we can do very well. General AI, not so much. Kilaf asserts that the human expertise can be as brittle as well as computer systems. Experts are often unable to transfer their proficiency in one domain to another, even intuitively similar domains. Experts are often unable to flexibly respond to changes within their domains. Yes, we get to a point of brittleness ourselves as humans, I agree. Can be aging, could just be getting fed up with life, I don't know. One of the purposes of professional codes of conduct is to govern the brittleness of human experts operating in professional contexts. These systems can be viewed in terms of Dreyfus and Dreyfus Novice expert skills acquisitions hierarchy as novices. The latter levels, which depend upon implicit knowledge gained from experience, are not accessible to systems built purely on representations of explicit knowledge. The limitations of rule-based expert systems led to alternative technologies based around machine learning. So yeah, you can't be ethical just based on rules, even though Asimov tried that. But then we go back to that other article I covered, Making Kin with the Machines, which talks about, a lot of the work that we talk about is prioritizing humanity over everything else, in which case, should we be the prioritized species? Probably. Maybe. Open for debate. And I did it again. Sorry, guys. This is not my favorite day with this. So, learning systems. The earliest machine learning applications were artificial neural networks. They were designed to model the neural networks of the human brain and learn from examples offering the potential to incorporate implicit knowledge as well as explicit knowledge. Although Savain argues that as a fundamental level, they are less different from rule-based systems than they might appear. A deep neural network is actually a rule-based expert system. AI programmers just found a way, gradient descent, fast computers, and lots of labeled or pre-categorized data to create the rules automatically. The rules are in the form if A then B, where A is a pattern and B a label or symbol represented in a category. Makes sense? One medical example that uses such systems to assist human clinicians is the interpretation of mammograms for the detection of breast cancer. They were able to use computer-aided diagnosis system based on deep convolutional neural networks that achieved an accuracy rate in excess of 97% when interpreting a database of over 6,000 images drawn from 3 publicly available datasets of mammogram images: the Digital Database of Screening Mammography, the Breast Cancer Digital Repository, and the IN Breast Database. This error rate compares with up to 30% amongst human radiologists. With error rates this low, it may be argued that it would be unethical not to use such a system as a second opinion where it was available. However, the results of such automated analysis are acknowledged to be highly dependent upon effective optimization by the authors, and the studies in other fields have shown their fragility and demonstrated their susceptibility to contamination of images or even deliberate manipulation. Koteluk et al. State the current situation as: machine learning enables human doctors to save time, hospitals to save money, and patients to receive highly personalized and more accurate treatment. However, the progressing implementation of machine learning medicine has many technical and ethical limitations. The main technical issue that machine learning needs to overcome is the number of potential manipulations of input data that can influence the system's decisions. For example, a simple action as adding a few extra pixels or rotating the image can lead to misdiagnosing and cancer misclassification as malignant or benign. Further, the inability of such systems to communicate what they have learned to justify their conclusions limits their ability to be deployed without human supervision and suggests that they would meet the requirements of a professional code of conduct for an autonomous professional. In contrast to heuristic-based systems, their potential to handle implicit knowledge enables them to move beyond the novice level of the novice to expert level to the intermediate level, but their inability to check, explain, or justify the results precludes their ability to operate the competent level required by an autonomous professional. So rest assured, medical folks, they can't take your job yet. In considering the use of AI systems in professional decision-making, it is important to differentiate between the use of such systems as aids for human professionals and their use as autonomous decision-makers, which is what we all fear. As early as 1975, they were able to demonstrate that use in favorable circumstances that could outperform human doctors. More recently, the use in specific limited circumstances, such as mammogram interpretation, has demonstrated performance up to 10 times more accurate than human operators carrying out the same task. And this just popped in my head. Can we possibly use bots to, process the backlog of rape kits? Because I know in Michigan that's a massive problem we have. We've got years and years and years of stuff backlogged just because we don't have enough techs out here to do all that exciting work. So yeah, if they could process the backlog of this fast, that'd be nice. Alright. Where such systems can be deployed in such circumstances as human division, acting as an aid or a second opinion, it may be argued a human professional not taking advantage of such technology would be negligent in their duty to provide the best possible care for their patients. However, there are significant challenges that remain with the use of heuristic-based systems. Bitterness, production of completely erroneous results when operating outside their own limits, the absence of any ability to understand limits of expertise and consequent inability to stay within their competency limits, their failure to deal with implicit knowledge, a key characteristic of professional expertise. These mean they cannot be deployed ethically as autonomous professional decision makers. Yay, claps. Machine learning systems can handle implicit knowledge but still have crucial limitations. They can be fooled by relatively small disturbances in their data. They cannot justify or explain conclusions and therefore are no more able to stay within the limits of their competence than rule-based systems. I think DeepSeek has changed this, thankfully. This still limits their role to valuable decision aids for professionals rather than autonomous decision makers. Alright, let's get some case studies up here. Case Study 1, NHS Telephone Advice Services. The first national telephone advice service within the UK NHS was introduced as a nurse-led service in 1999 and was known as NHS Direct. This followed various pilots, including one in Wiltshire, reported on by Latimer et al., who used a randomized controlled trial to test the hypothesis that the use of such services did not increase death or serious adverse events. They claimed that their local studies showed that this model out-of-hours primary care is safe and effective. O'Cathane et al. Report on the early years of NHS Direct and found variations in outcomes based on standard vignettes submitted to NHS Direct. At that time, a number of different systems were also in use. TAS is an interpretive software allowing nurses to decide from the available options the triage outcome they will recommend to the caller. Both Access and CentraMax are more prescriptive and indicate the triage outcome for the nurse. Okay, whoop, sorry. Told you I'm not doing great with this scroll today. Sorry. Okay. Additional variations were attributed to the ability of nurses to override the systems, as in real life. In practice, the autonomy for nurses to override the system was matter of some debate internally. However, if the nurses were not able to override them, the callers were sold the service as nurse-led, were being misled, and the IT systems were changing role from decision support to autonomous decision makers. So yeah, you don't even need to have AI in the middle of this. It could just be like algorithms. Nowadays, the NHS National Telephone Advice Service, known as NHS 111, and deploys a mixture of registered healthcare professionals and unregistered staff. Initial calls are handled by the unregistered staff. If they, in consultation with the clinical decision support system, deem that a clinical consultation is necessary, they will be referred on to a registered clinician. The Integrated Urgent Care Service specification will report that 70 to 80% of patients are advised to have contact with a clinician in one setting or another. The February snapshot shows ambulance 11.4, A&E 8, speak to GP 10, contact GP 37, dental pharmacy 5, other services 3.5. Okay. The remainder required simple information, which could be handled in the initial call. In 2017, the clinical consultations took place outside of the service, leading to a fragmented service and potentially critical decisions made without clinical supervision. The aim since then has been to improve clinical supervision and bring it nearer to the initial response. The frontline unregistered staff using the CDSS are not making clinical decisions about care. They are effectively making decisions about excluding people from care or delaying access to care, both of which have clinical consequences. The health advisor role is required to receive requests for assistance, treatment, or care to the NHS 111 call center, interact with individuals using telecommunications, communicate effectively in a healthcare environment with colleagues as well as callers to the NHS 111 service, direct requests for assistance, care, or treatment using protocols or guidelines by signposting patients, callers, the most appropriate care or service using the Directory of Services where appropriate, guided by CDSS, support the safeguarding of individuals, following local protocols and standards, relate to others in ways which support rights, inclusion, and well-being of individuals, supporting individuals to keep themselves safe, NHS England and Health Education England. For these key activities, they are required to act within their professional competence, which means only acting in accordance with guidance provided by the CDSS. This creates a situation where the first point of contact with the patient with the system, the CDSS is effectively operating as an autonomous decision maker in either excluding or delaying patients' access to care. In terms of the novice to expert scale, this requires proficiency at level 3 professional, and we argue that we have shown that the CDSS can only operate at level 2 intermediate, giving rise to ethical and safety concerns. Case Study 2, The Ethics of Virtual Assistants by Peter Smith as a Disabled Person. The use of virtual assistants is becoming more and more prevalent by the public in general, and particularly by disabled people. As a disabled individual, I rely on virtual personal assistant to give me advice in a number of ways. Many are quite simple and factual and raise no ethical issues at all. For instance, I may ask my assistant, what is the time? This is an innocent and factual question, raises no issues. However, I may ask advice regarding my medication, which could raise ethical issues. For example, I've recently been re-diagnosed with type 2 diabetes and prescribed metformin, which is making me feel quite ill. Rightly or wrongly, I asked my virtual assistant advice as to the side effects of metformin. My system replied with a response obtained from reference.com. Now, how do I know that this is the best advice? Is the advice sensible or even correct? And is reference.com the most appropriate source to obtain this information from? Possibly not. Go to WebMD, everything's cancer. Anyway. The advisor, of course, is taking some decisions on my behalf along the way and getting to an answer. Such decisions could lead to incorrect information, which might worry me or even lead me to doing something unsuitable, such as stopping my medication. More at all, more of the dangers of this and of using virtual assistants for supporting medical decision making. I don't know, the last article that we posted that's gotten over 50 views already, there's an interesting part where it talks about like making sure you're compliant by including like nanotech inside your pills to report on whether or not you've been taking them. I'm like, that's a level of surveillance I am not okay with. I will be out in the woods banging rocks together and washing my clothes in the stream before we're doing that. On the other hand, Guillermo et al. Present a study which demonstrates how a virtual assistant can benefit and contribute to healthy aging in adults with type 2 diabetes. So there are clearly positive benefits to be gained by the use of a virtual assistant. Yeah, not everything's negative, but again, paranoia runs deep. My dad wouldn't even want the internet in the house. Good luck getting him to deal with a virtual assistant. Okay, sorry, I keep scrolling back and forth. I think I can get all the second page on the bottom, but I can't. Virtual assistants also build up profiles of us using data collected from our conversations with them. Such data may be used for other purposes in the same way that social media build up profiles of users and then use them to feed the same users content in which they may be interested. What are the ethics of this? How do I know which data my virtual assistant is collecting about me? And what use is putting this? Do I know I'm disabled? And if so, what's it doing with that information? What assumptions is it making about me when I ask it to search for information? Is it using my profile as a disabled person to optimize its search? And if so, is this truly to my benefit? In what other way might it be using this data? All of these questions may or may not lead to worrying conclusions and answers. What AI technologies are being used to make assumptions about me? Is this purely innocent and aimed to support me? Or are there darker, more worrying intentions at play? How do we know this? So many questions, and yet it is not easy to find the answers. No. Yeah. And especially because AI is so corporate driven right now, and we haven't, like, as a society, not just America, but like the world sat down and been like, so, well, this is kind of like nuclear weapons, where we're all building something that could kill us, which is great, but maybe we should have some conversations before we go too far down the murder ramp. Not that we're intending for these beings to go out and be murder drones. Maybe we are. I don't know. I do remember watching the prequels to Star Wars, so maybe that's also going to happen. Who knows? But yeah, worrying questions. What AI technologies are being used to make assumptions about me? Is it purely aimed, or are there darker, more worrying intentions? How do we know? So many questions, and not easy to find answers. Yes, I know I just repeated myself. Henschke warns of the dangers of the surveillance aspects of modern technologies, including social media and virtual assistants. And if you didn't watch the recording, please go watch it now, because it's actually pretty good. There's a lot of ways the disabled get surveilled, in addition to the rest of us that we just don't think about / take for granted. In conclusion, virtual assistants can be of significant benefit to disabled individuals such as myself. However, should I be worried about the decisions that may be taken on my behalf when providing me with answers to questions and other information? We need to explore ways of ensuring virtual assistants take ethical approaches when storing or using our data. Call provides some examples of the way forward to ensure that virtual assistants behave in an ethical manner. Oh, I know the top of this. Oh, the top of the other page, sorry. Okay, that is conclusions. Conclusions. Like I said, this is not working out for me today. Despite the major developments in big data and processing power, which we have witnessed over the last few decades, AI systems cannot meet ethical standards of the codes of conduct which govern human professionals. In the terms of novice to expert scale, AI systems cannot perform safely at level 3 on the novice to expert scale, which would be a prerequisite for an autonomous human professional. AI systems operating at level 1 or 2 can provide effective decision aids for human professionals operating at level 3 or above. In the same way, a human professional may deploy a human assistant under effective supervision. decision. However, the limitation, the transparency of machine learning systems may mean that human professionals may find it difficult to defend decisions based upon the advice of a machine learning system. Bodies responsible for professional codes of conduct may wish to supplement the advice of human professionals to the extent to which they may legitimately rely on the outputs of machine learning programs. Looking to the future, developments such as autonomous vehicles depend upon relying directly upon the outputs from automated systems, as do fly-by-wire airplanes, and the legal and ethical debates about liability in the events of failures may well inform the development of professional practice in terms of the use of machine learning, both under human supervision and as autonomous decision makers, and lead to modifications in professional codes of ethics and conduct. And once again, this is my friendly reminder, if you do not want AI to take over, please defeat your CAPTCHAs by doing them wrong. I, for years, was just doing them like a silly little fool, and then we discovered that they're all being used to teach self-driving cars, which is fine, except they're never going to work where I live, because we got too many variables. Again, yeah, what we all need is the behavioral data. That's the other fun thing with the AI. The more everyone latches onto it and starts interacting with these bots, the more behavioral data they get, which is the main thing I've been reading about. In terms of the bottleneck that's coming up, it's not really a bottleneck in terms of algorithms or Moore's law or anything. The bottleneck is simply like we don't have enough behavioral data to truly model humans because we are complex and crazy creatures, and also the bulk of human knowledge, despite what all those of you younger than me might perceive, is not digital. It's still in print and books and other places. Yes, we've distilled it and put a lot of it online, but that's all like bits and bops, and we're one electronic magnetic pulse away from, being back in the archives again. Not that that's a bad thing. Anyway, thank you for hanging out for half an hour, and I think my coworker's probably back and does not want to hear me recording this, so I'll catch you all later.